Oh, the Branstons, they were there for whoever they are. Hi, Maureen. Well, is Melanie here yet?
She is.
She is? Where is she?
Yep.
She was panicking about not getting in and all sorts of problems. Ah, Melanie. Hi, Melanie. You made it. I know you've had sleepless nights. Okay, it's shall we start?
David, we're live, if you'd like to take it away.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, especially quite a few of our Canadian friends, even though they're not vaccinated yet. Tonight, we're delighted to have Lynda Fishman all the way from Toronto, which is much colder here. There, sorry. And Lynda will be speaking for the first part of the evening, and then we'll have questions and answers. So please try not to interrupt her. You can go into the chat room while she is speaking, but it will only be heard when she finishes. The other way to ask questions is a tab on the right-hand side of the bottom participants area that says raise electronic hand. If you click on that, we will pick it up and then we'll tell you to ask the question. But you must demute yourself when you want to speak. But please don't wave your hands in front of the cameras as we won't see you. When Lynda was 13, her mother and two sisters were killed in an Air Canada plane crash. Her father fell into a deep depression and she was left but to fend for herself. A teen with big dreams, Lynda mustered up the courage to become happy and to lead a meaningful life. Amongst her many accomplishments, Lynda became a clinical social worker, a therapist, summer camp director, college professor, author, and inspirational speaker. Lynda's book, Repairing Rainbows, describes her life before and after the tragedy, providing people with the hope and inspiration they need during this time of uncertainty and fear. Lynda, this is your evening.
Thanks, David. It's amazing that we could all be together over Zoom and there's no jet lag or delays with flights. So there are some definite silver linings through all this. We always have to look for the silver linings. Before I get started on my story, I do want to mention the reason that I am sharing my story, and something that comes to mind whenever anyone asks me is the expression, same storm, different boats. And I think that is so appropriate now, almost a year into COVID, where we are all in the entire world in this same storm, but we are all in such different boats. Some people are in yachts, some people are in speedboats, some people are in rowboats, and some people are hanging on to driftwood. And I think it's a really important message, and it's a message that I myself learned as a very young child when I went through this tragedy, the same tragedy that my father went through. And yet we were both in very different boats and made very different choices about how to move forward. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But what I do want to emphasize is the reason that I do share this story, particularly now, but certainly over the past 11 years since I wrote my book, is because you never know what people are dealing with. You never know what boat they're in while they're in their storm. And I believe that losses, whether it's a death or loss of a dream, loss of a job, loss of freedom, loss of peace of mind, all of those losses are very difficult, and we never know what people are dealing with. And I always like to remind everyone who I speak to be very empathetic and sensitive to the fact that you never know what people are dealing with behind closed doors. The other thing I'd like to do is hopefully provide some hope and inspiration to everybody about how to deal with difficult times, how to be resilient, how to find hope when you feel like there is no hope, and how to get through tragedy and feel as if not only did it not define you, but it refined you. So the other last and not least message is that we always have choices. And I emphasize that in all my talks, and I emphasize that in my book. And I really do believe that no matter what we're faced with in life, we have choices and we make choices. So let me start with, excuse my technical skills. I'm going to try to share the screen. It might take me a minute, but I'm going to do my best here. So I'm going to start off with showing you a picture of me and my husband. We've been married for 41 years. That's my husband, Barry. And when people meet us, they think, wow, these people have...
Sorry, Lynda, nothing's showing up.
Not showing up?
Not showing up.
Weird.
If you try again.
Let me try again.
Okay.
Hold on. Share screen. That's where I thought I went. Okay, try it again.
Yep.
Now?
Yep, we've got it.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so as I said, that's my husband, Barry. We've been married for 41 years. And when people meet us and they see the accomplishments that we're both so proud of, they assume we've always had a very easy life and things have always been fantastic. And as you will hear when I tell my story, that's not the case. We've had a lot of challenges and we certainly had very difficult childhoods. But we are still, despite all of that, we feel very blessed and lucky. Next screen. There we are now, a view that we're all used to seeing. Here is a picture of our family. That's our 3 kids on the right, Rebecca, Jonathan, and Kim. And the big picture is the picture of our family with our grandchildren. There's our grandchildren, Benjamin and Zachary, who are now 8 and 6. And that's our 3 dogs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about all of us, and then I am going to get into the story. So first of all, as David mentioned, I am now a therapist in private practice. I've had quite an interesting career throughout my life. I've sort of evolved and reinvented myself a few times. I started off as a hospital social worker and therapist. Then I became a summer camp director. After doing that for almost 25 years, I was teaching as a professor at a college in the social service worker program. I then, after I wrote my book, started traveling and speaking all over Canada and the States. And I even spoke in Australia and on a cruise ship, telling my story. And now I'm back in private practice, hopefully making a difference in the lives of people in whatever way I possibly can. My husband, Barry, has been the CEO of 4 different pharmaceutical companies. And he's just recently sort of retired, where he's cut back from working 50, 60 hours a week down to about 20. And as I showed you, our 3 children and grandchildren are a huge part of our lives, and we feel extremely blessed. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it wasn't always like that. So this is a picture of, my family when I was a little girl. That was taken in 1969. My mother is on the left, and then there's a picture of the 5 of us, me and my 2 sisters and my parents, and my 2 sisters are on the right. My mother's name was Rita. My sisters were Carla and Wendy, and my father's name was Saul, although often people called him Shloimi. And in 1970, a year after this picture was taken, my mother and two sisters were killed in an Air Canada plane crash. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I wasn't on that flight. But basically what happened was we were going to California to celebrate a bar mitzvah in our family. It was the first simcha that our family was going to be celebrating, our first bar mitzvah, actually. And I went the week before with my maternal grandparents so that I could set up the apartment we were going to be living in for a month. My mother and sisters were coming the week after, and then my father was scheduled to come the week after that. And the plane crashed from en route from Montreal to Toronto, crashed in Toronto. The cause of the crash was pilot error, and all 109 people on board died that day. So I remember extremely vividly getting that phone call at about 5 o'clock in the morning, California time, letting us know that the plane had crashed and they did not know if there were any survivors. And I was there with my grandparents, and we were at my aunt's apartment, and we immediately were rushed to the airport to fly back to Montreal, where by the time we landed, we knew that—
your sound is dropping out. I don't know if there's anything you can do at your end.
Is that better? Hello? Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. So when we got back to Montreal, it was pretty obvious that there had been no survivors. And this was back in 1970, and life immediately drastically changed for me and my father. And when I think back to how things were handled back in 1970, it was so completely different than the way things are handled nowadays. Obviously, there was no outpouring of support other than the people in our immediate circle who were with us and incredibly loving and supportive. But nowadays, people are inundated with support from around the world, which obviously helps people get through really tough times. And I mean, we didn't even meet the family members of the other victims until 40 years later. So we really did feel very isolated and very alone going through this tragedy. And our house went from a very busy home where we were always having company, there were always people over, to a silent and dismal, horrible home. So I'll just describe a little bit about what life was like leading up to 1970 and this terrible tragedy, so you can understand why I believe I am who I am today, because I believe those first 13 years and the influence my parents and their values and the way they conducted their lives obviously impacted me and gave me the strength and the courage and so many other reasons to want to live and make good choices about how to move forward. So my mother did a ton of volunteer work. She had a full-time job, but she also did volunteer work raising money for a group then known as the Montreal Association for the Mentally Retarded. And we as a family were involved in doing fundraising events and all kinds of activities and events that supported that charity. So we were taught at a very early age to do for others. And it also taught us that children are children and people are people. It doesn't matter what their challenges are, you still have to love them and embrace them. And that was something that obviously was a really important lesson that we not only were taught through words, but through actions. My father was in business with his dad, his dad and his brother, and they were in the floor covering business in Montreal, and they were very close brothers. And my father was the kind of guy who was always whistling and telling jokes and kibitzing and having a good time. And he went from that type of person to a obviously destroyed man who stopped telling jokes, stopped whistling, just was absolutely destroyed by this horrible tragedy, understandably. My sisters were really different. Carla, who was 11 at the time, was the very serious one in the family. She was going to be a doctor. She was always reading books and doing needlepoint and making sure that she was looking after our family cat. And she took school very seriously. And she always said she was going to be a doctor. Wendy, who was 8 at the time, was the little actress in the family. She was the one who entertained us. She did not take school that seriously. She was much more interested in dancing and joking around and making us all laugh. And I was the responsible one who walked dogs in the neighborhood and helped my mother cook and clean and do gardening. And so we were all very different, but we were really close. My father actually never even called us by our names. He always called us number 1, number 2, and number 3. So, which was kind of a joke in our family that he never remembered our names, but he really did. Anyway, so 1970 was quite a year for me and my father. And as I said at the beginning, we were in the same storm, but we were in very different boats. I was a 13-year-old kid who was determined to find a way to move forward, to become happy again, to go out there and continue doing what my parents had taught us, which was to make a difference in the lives of others and live a meaningful life. And I immersed myself in school and volunteer work and my friends, and I just did whatever I could to stay as busy and distracted as possible. And I learned very quickly that as long as I was busy and distracted and spending time making a difference, volunteering at a hospital, doing whatever I could to be distracted from the terrible sadness that I watched my father dealing with and that I felt myself, but didn't really know how to deal with it. And so I kind of faked it and did whatever I could to get through those years. And when I was 17, I met my husband, Barry, who, there he is, who had also gone through unbelievable tragedy as a child. But the thing about the two of us was that we were 17 years old, and it wasn't a pity party, and it wasn't, hey, you think you've had tragedy, well, I've had tragedy. It was, listen, we've both gone through terrible tragedies, and we want to together move forward and make a meaningful life for each other, and go out there and do the best that we can and make our parents proud. So Barry's story is that when he was 7 months old and his brother was 4, they were living in Florida at the time. Their 32-year-old mother died of a heart attack while she was home alone with the boys. So their father came home and found his wife dead on the kitchen floor and the 2 little children crying. And so he picked up his 2 boys, moved back to Montreal where he had family that could help him. And he raised the 2 boys by himself. And the most challenging thing for Barry's father was that he was raising the 4-year-old Mitchell, who never really developed beyond about the age of 6. So having developmental delays back in those years was far more challenging than it is now. The schools didn't know how to deal with him. Neighborhood kids were horrible to him. He was at a loss at how to be the best possible dad to a kid who was so challenged. And he did the best that he could. He raised those 2 boys by himself with a lot of love and support from the family, but nevertheless, he was on his own. And when Barry was 17, just a few months before meeting me, they were out washing the car, and right in front of Barry and his brother, their father died of a heart attack and left the 2 boys on their own. So I met Barry just a few months after he had been orphaned and left with his brother. And like I said, we decided that we were really meant to be together because we understood and valued life more than most people our age. And we got married when we were 22 years old, and we obviously understand that, tragedy and childhood scars can either define you or refine you. And we chose to allow them to completely refine us. And we've made some important choices about moving forward and making a difference. And so, like I said, he's been the CEO of 4 pharmaceutical companies. He's done really well for himself. And when I think about what we did to get to where we are now, it's pretty remarkable that we were making the choices we made. So from the time that we met until we got married, we decided that we were going to finish university. None of our parents had gone to university, and we knew that was something that would really make them proud and was important. So we went to McGill. I did my bachelor's in social work there, and Barry did his business degree. And while we were going to school, we had really horrible part-time jobs that we needed to do in order to pay for school. I was washing hair at a hairdresser and waiting tables, where I was getting amazing tips at both jobs. And Barry pumped gas at a full service gas station. And he also worked in the summertime at General Motors, where he was welding cars and literally would get burned from the sparks flying, because there was no such thing as health and safety back then. And, to be able to look back and think that that's where we came from and that's what we had to do in order to get to where we are now is something that we feel extremely proud of. But it wasn't done without a lot of thought and a lot of choices. And so now we've come up together with what we call our 8 happiness choices. And I'm going to share those with you because I think that is really the secret to why we are where we are all these years later. So they're not in any particular order. The first one is to surround yourself with positive, optimistic people. And as it says here, people can inspire you or they can drain you. So you have to choose them wisely. And we really do believe that it's important to stay away from really negative, difficult, critical, controlling, and miserable people. Those are the people that have a problem for every solution, and misery does love company. So, we have this expression that says sometimes we just have to weed the garden and we have to stop watering the weeds and start watering the flowers. Because when you're surrounded by happy, optimistic, solution-oriented people, they lift you up, they make you feel better. They're kind, they're caring, they're pleasant. They smile, they like to celebrate. And we really believe that positivity is contagious and so is negativity. So number 1 is surround yourself with positive, optimistic people. And I know most people say, yeah, but what if they're related and you have no choice? Well, that we can talk about that a little bit later. But even if that's the case, sometimes your positivity and your optimism can be so contagious that even people who are miserable have no choice but to rise up to what your positive energy is all about. And so I truly believe it's contagious. Number 2 is stay busy and continue to learn and grow. And as I mentioned, I really did live by that as a teenager going through a terrible time. I kept myself as busy as I possibly could because I felt like if I had too much free time to really think and wallow in any kind of pity, that I would go to a dark place and not come out of it. So, and I watched my father do that, and without blaming him, he didn't even know he had a choice. He didn't get the help that he needed. And he was just in a terrible state of complete sadness and profound sadness for the remainder of his life. So staying busy and learning and growing, I believe, is really important. And it has to be staying busy with things that you feel are meaningful, things that, like I said here, keep your mind right, things that you find inspiring and make you feel grateful, make you feel good. And,
Lynda, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt. The image that you're showing is still on number 7. So I don't know if you're trying to scroll down on those.
Oh, it didn't go down to if you keep your grind right?
Nope.
Gosh, these technical skills are definitely. Can you see it now?
No, we're still on number 7. Still on the picture of your family.
Oh, that's crazy. All right, let's try this again. Can you see that one?
No, it's still on slide 7.
Okay, so I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. Let me stop and
You
try again.
Oh,
I'm going to try again.
okay.
I don't give up that easily. What can you see now?
The screen sharing is starting. It seems that other people are able to see some of the screens I'm seeing.
Okay. It's, you know what? It's not important. I don't need to share the screens. I can just talk.
Okay.
Forget technology. Let's just do the real thing. Okay. So number 3, help others. As I said, we are all in the same storm, particularly now. That couldn't be truer. And we're all in different boats. So reaching out and helping others, making a difference in the lives of other people's, struggles, and helping them is, to me, probably the most important of all of these 8 happiness choices. One of the things I did was I volunteered at the hospital with children. I was like 14 and 15 years old volunteering. And what I learned really quickly was that when you can make a difference in the lives of others, somehow it lifts you up. And it also made me realize that maybe my life's not so bad, which I know sounds unbelievable. But when I would look at these little children who were hooked up to IVs and they were bald and they were suffering, somehow I felt luckier than them, even though my entire life was different. And I had gone through this horrible tragedy. I looked at them and I felt like if I could make them laugh and I could make a difference in their lives, then I can feel better about myself. And, I think when people would invite me for dinner, I don't know whether or not they ever realized it, but that was helping me more than anything, because I didn't have to go home to that silent house and stand at the counter and eat, because I didn't want to sit at the table anymore all by myself. And my father was, often not around. And it just was such a mitzvah to be invited to someone's house. It sounds like such a small thing, but it really made a big difference. And so reaching out and helping others and making a difference is not only, I think, a critical way to deal with anything in your life to make you feel good, but it's one of our core Jewish values. And, kindness and concern for others obviously goes such a long way. Number 4, express gratitude. I believe that learning the art of expressing gratitude is one of the most important things we can do to make ourselves feel better. If you can look at what you do have in your life instead of what you don't have, and you can feel grateful for it, then you can help yourself really rise and feel much better about what's going on in your life. And again, it goes back to those miserable people that we want to stay away from. They never feel grateful. Nothing is ever good enough. They're always complaining. And those are the kinds of people who really, I think, need a lesson in feeling grateful. And I had to put my money where my mouth is, because when my kids were little, I did go down that road of feeling a little sorry for my kids that they didn't have grandparents. Feeling, because Barry had no parents, obviously, and my father was really absent, and then he ended up dying, but my kids really didn't have grandparents. And so I decided that I was going to do something to make that change. And I put an ad in one of the local Jewish newspapers looking for surrogate grandparents for my kids. And in theory, I still think it was a brilliant idea, because knowing that there were people out there who didn't have their own grandchildren who could come and, have Friday night dinner with us, or come and have brunch with us and be there for my children, felt like a fantastic solution. The only problem is the people who applied for the job were not exactly what I had had in mind. And after about the 3rd interview, my kids and my husband said, this probably wasn't one of your best ideas. And do we have to keep interviewing people? Which was, they were 100% right. But what that did for me was, it made me realize that I have to look at what I do have and not what I don't have. And yes, my children don't have grandparents, but they have parents who love them a lot. We have amazing extended family. I have a husband who goes along with all my crazy ideas, and we have to look at what we're grateful for. And that made a huge difference for me. So looking at that in a grateful way instead of in a way where I was feeling like we were cheated really shifted for me the whole experience. And all of a sudden I didn't notice grandparents everywhere anymore, which I had always noticed before. Suddenly it didn't seem like such a big issue for me. So I do attribute that to gratitude. Number 5 is look ahead and don't look back. Now, I really do believe that we sometimes have to look back, but for only one reason, and that is to learn some lessons, to look back and see how far we've come and what we've learned along the way. But I don't believe it's healthy to look back and stay stuck in the past in places of regret and remorse and guilt and all of that, because just like in our cars, when we get in our car and we want to go somewhere, we enter where we are into our GPS system and where we want to go. And the person who's directing us, whether it's a woman in your car or a man, is not going to spend the whole time talking about how last week you didn't turn left, you should have turned right, and last week you made that mistake. What they say is, this is where you are now and this is where you want to go. And if you do make a wrong turn along the way, that person in your car just simply says one thing to you, and that is recalculating. And they say, okay, if this is where you want to go and you've made a wrong turn, let's not get caught up in why you made the wrong turn. They don't blast you. There's no broigus about it. It's just, okay, we're going to recalculate. And to me, I think we need to do that in life. I think that's a really important message. So like I said, if something went well, great, it's wonderful. If something didn't go so well, learn from it and move forward and recalculate. Number 6, have faith and have patience.
Linda, sorry,
Yes.
can I interrupt a second? Apparently, David was the only one that couldn't see these slides properly. Everybody else could see them properly, and that they're all demanding it back.
They are.
Yeah, so can you bring them back? Sorry, you're on number 6.
Okay, I'm going to try it again then.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
No, we've had a lot of complaints. They all like the slides.
Okay, so let's see. I'm on have faith and patience. Now I have to put my glasses on so I can see where we are here. Oh, gratitude. All right. Grow through what you go through. That was the one we just talked about. And now I think this is a really important one, particularly now. When I talk about have faith and have patience, we don't have to unpack where we are right now. This is a time of life that we are all very anxious to see come to an end because we're all done with COVID. But there have been many chapters in our lives, and God willing, there will continue to be other chapters, and we don't want to get lost or stuck in the one we're in now. And I think that's a really important message. And I think that I have said to myself through the years so many times, just have faith and have patience that things will work out, and don't give up. Patience is the ability to wait and to keep a good attitude while we're waiting. And that's a choice that I think we can all make. The next one is to spend time with animals. As I showed you earlier, we have 3 big dogs, and I truly believe that everything listed on here is what we learn from dogs. And I really do believe that that's why they only have to live about 12, 14 years, because they get this every day of their life. They are so sincere and loyal and faithful. They understand forgiveness. They're always grateful, even like for the smallest piece of liver. They do know how to love unconditionally. They want to help others. They're very patient, and they also know how to play. And we have a lot to learn from animals. So even if you're not an animal lover, I think it's important to remember that they have a lot to teach us. And, one of the things that I find so amazing right now during COVID is how many people have gotten dogs, which, this is a time where they could have the opportunity to really train them and spend time with them, but also to look to the animals for lessons, because they do have so much to teach us. And the last choice, but not least, is to choose positive thoughts. And I really do believe that you cannot live a positive life if you have a negative mind. And we do get to choose our thoughts. We get to choose what we allow in our heads and what we are going to feed, and what thoughts we're going to replace with thoughts that make us feel better and give us more peace of mind. And I'll give you an example of how I've put this to use since I've started speaking in the past 11 years. When I first started speaking, I was in front of an audience of about 300 people, and there was a woman literally right in front of me on her phone the entire time that I was speaking. And I was so distracted by the fact that she was on her phone that I don't feel that I concentrated on my talk or really delivered the best talk I could possibly deliver, because I was so distracted by this woman. And after that talk, I said to myself, because you get to choose thoughts, from now on, if anyone is on their phones while you're speaking, why don't you just think that they're taking notes on what you're saying? And as soon as I thought about it that way, whether it's true or not, that motivated me and inspired me to try to do the best possible talk I could do, rather than to be distracted and think that she's talking to someone else. She's taking notes. And that is what I mean when I say choose thoughts. We never speak to anyone more than we speak to ourselves. And if we're going to choose thoughts that are motivating and inspiring and make us feel better about who we are and what we're doing in our lives, then we are giving ourselves the most important gift we can. So again, choose positive thoughts and replace negative thoughts with thoughts that make you feel better. Put on those rose-colored glasses. Why not? We only get to be here once. We may as well do whatever we can to live the most positive life as possible. So just my final slide is just a picture of the book that I wrote. And I did start writing this book about 2 years before it came out. So the book came out in 2010. I started writing it in 2008. And it took me almost 40 years to put this story on paper, as I had written it over and over again in my head so many times. And I finally decided that it was important to tell my story and hopefully inspire people, other people who have gone through any kind of loss. It doesn't have to be a terrible tragedy. Loss is loss. Someone or something is gone and people are in pain. And what I really wanted them to learn from my story was that no matter what tragedy you go through, you can find a way to live your life again and to find a way to live a meaningful life. And the sadness and the grief never go away. They do get easier, but they can exist at the same time as happiness and joy and gratitude and positivity. And that's, to me, one of the most important messages that I try to deliver. So there you go. That's my story. I'm going to stop sharing now. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I appreciate that everybody was so attentive.
Okay, can I start it off? I mean, that's quite. I don't know what the word is, because it's something that it's impossible to get into your mind, really. I mean, I'm just speechless, really, because it's something that I don't know how you survived it. I mean, you were 13, and your dad was, however,
44.
44. Okay, and you had to live with him as a little girl. I mean, how was it? What was it like growing up together?
Well, it was a completely drastic change from the first 13 years to the remaining years of my dad's life. As I mentioned, he went from a man who told jokes and whistled and was just a jolly, fun guy to be around to a destroyed man, truly destroyed. But I was determined that I wasn't going to let this tragedy destroy me, because I watched what it did to him. And to me, that looked way harder to deal with than trying to muster up whatever it took to get back on track and live a meaningful life.
Mm. Because when you met Barry and you said you were 17, so that was only 4 years afterwards. How did your dad take all of that? Did he ever sort of get any happiness before he passed away?
Well, that's a bit of a complicated question. You have to read the book to
All
hear
right.
all the details. But he did remarry quite soon afterward. And even though he remarried, my dad never became the dad I knew again. I think he remarried because he needed someone to take care of him. And he also erased, in my opinion, he erased his past. It was too painful to deal with. There was no professional help available to him at the time. You know, people only went to see therapists if they were, quote, crazy, which is so sad because he could have benefited from some help. But he did move on with his life in an unusual way, in that, in my opinion, he just deleted the past, including me. And in 1999, he was diagnosed with cancer and succumbed to it almost immediately. He had no fight in him.
Yeah. Okay. Did you meet any other of the family that were in the plane crash? How many people? I mean, I'm assuming that everybody in the plane was killed, and that must be a whole different story. But did you ever meet any of the other people?
So, believe it or not, 40 years after the plane crash, there were a few families, including me, who had worked over the phone to try to get the crash site cleaned up, because it had never been cleaned up properly all those years, and to find a way to have it turned into an official cemetery so that nothing could ever be built at the crash site. And the reason for that was because they never really recovered most of the bodies. It was so badly scattered. And so a couple of families worked really hard to get that to happen. And we only met 40 years later at the unveiling of this monument. And now it's an official cemetery and we have somewhere to go.
You didn't really meet them. Yeah, I mean, you met them, but you didn't get close with any of them.
No.
Were they mostly from Canada, Canadians?
A lot from Montreal and Toronto, and some from the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Question?
I was just going to jump in. The question, as David mentioned, obviously the accident itself. And I just wondered, was any action, you said it was down to pilot error. Mm-hmm. Was any action ever taken against the pilot, and whatever happened? Obviously he didn't survive, but what was the actual finding for the reason of his error?
So what happened was the co-pilot had requested permission to deploy the spoiler system when they were still above the runway, which basically meant that the plane landed, dropped 50 feet, caught on fire, and then they took off again and crashed 7 miles from the airport in Toronto. They have, as soon as that happened, the airlines and the manufacturers of the planes put something in so that could never happen again. That was a, back in 1970, planes were still pretty new, big commercial planes. And so, and there was action taken against Air Canada. Believe me, if this happened nowadays, Air Canada never would have gotten away with what they got away with back then. They bullied us. They treated all of the family members, and I confirmed this when I finally met other family members 40 years later, but I remember as clear as yesterday, the way they made us feel as if somehow we had done something wrong. And we all felt that the settlements were done very quickly and very unfairly. It would never fly, no pun intended, nowadays, that's for sure. They would never get away with the way they treated us.
Just changing the subject slightly, could I just apologise to you over the slideshow issue? It was my system that crashed, and other people, it seemed, didn't have a problem. So I apologise to you. I apologise to all of them as well. But the one thing we did gain from that, we could see the feeling in your face. And it was so meaningful listening to you actually telling the story, which is in itself very valuable. And thank you for that.
Yeah. Are there any questions out there?
There are none at the moment.
No question. Okay, well, I'll carry on, but I don't want to. I don't want to hog the whole of Lynda.
You might have to. We're waiting on them. They're very shy.
It's a shy group.
Yeah. You've never known it that Jewish people could be so quiet.
Yeah. It's because we didn't serve food. That's why.
Well, I think you know. I mean, it's such a. I'm speechless, really. I mean, you know, it's so difficult, and I think people don't know how to go, whether they go too far, in you know, talking about very, very personal things which you're doing, and I think that could be part of it. But the book that you wrote, what was it, the Repairing Rainbows, which I did try to get here, but I couldn't. I tried everybody, and they, Amazon do it, but it's very expensive. But it can come in on Kindle. So if anybody wants it, if you ask me, I'll tell them how to get it. But I noticed on the front cover there was a rather strange doll. What was the significance of that?
So my youngest sister, Wendy, had this doll who she had named Barbara. And it was pretty crazy because that was apparently one of the only identifiable items at the crash site. And so the day after the plane crash, that picture of that doll was on the front page of the newspapers that were telling the story. So you can only imagine when we got the newspaper that day and saw Wendy's doll on the cover that we were all incredibly freaked out by what had happened. So when I was trying to come up with a cover for the book, I still had the original newspaper clipping, and I thought that was an appropriate cover to use, or appropriate picture to use on the cover. But if you have time, I'll tell you the most crazy story about that. You said I have till midnight your time, right? So yeah, I'm going to tell the story now.
Not your time.
David, just to say, there are some questions coming in now. So
okay. let Lynda finish what she
I'll just tell this, because what it did was it really, for me, validated that I needed to tell this story, and I needed to use this particular picture. So what happened was, my son's very creative, and he was trying to come up with something for the cover of the book after it was written, and we were getting ready to send it to be published, and it had to be out by June. And here it was April, and we hadn't been able to agree yet on a cover. Nothing that he came up with felt right. And I kept saying, I want to use this picture. I want to use this picture, but I'm worried about getting sued because the picture belonged to whatever photographer had submitted it to the newspapers. Anyways, beginning of April, my husband's company, back then, this is in 2010, we were going on a pharmaceutical trip to the Caribbean, and we were actually supposed to go to Mexico. And I said, okay, I'm going to bring the manuscript with me. And when we get back, we're going to figure out the cover, and we'll get it to the publisher, and we'll just get it done. And so a couple of days before we were scheduled to go to Mexico, he told me we were switching it to Punta Cana because people were worried about going to Mexico back then. So now we're going to Punta Cana, and we get to our hotel. And when we go to check in, my husband, who admittedly is a workaholic, needed access to the business center, and he asked about access, and they said, well, your room doesn't give you access, because everybody was in the same quality room. If you want, we can move you to a fancier room and then you can go to the business center. We said, no, we're going to stay in the same room as everyone. Just give us access. So they said, okay, we're going to give you this bracelet. You can wear this black bracelet, but you have to promise us you will only use it to go to the business center. You won't use it to go on the private beach or anything else. And we said, oh no, don't worry. Of course, we'll only use it for the business center. Of course, the next day we said, well, we have these black bracelets. Why don't we go to the private beach? And we're really good rule followers, but we felt like rebels that day and we went to the private beach. And here I am. Honestly, I don't even know why it was a private beach. Was roped off from the other beach, totally exactly the same beach. But I spread out my manuscript and I'm sitting there. And this woman sitting next to me says to me, what are you working on? We start chatting. I tell her about my book and she goes, oh my God, stay right here. She runs over to someone else on the private beach and brings him back and introduces him to me as a retired Air Canada pilot. So I start talking to him and tell him about it. And he goes, is that the crash from 1970? And I said, yes. And he literally, the color drained from his face. And he goes, I witnessed that plane crash. Now, I was like dumbfounded because first of all, I was supposed to be in Mexico. And here I am in Punta Cana. I wasn't supposed to be on this private beach, but I was on this private beach. And now I'm meeting someone who witnessed the plane crash. I had never met anyone in my life who had witnessed it. I was going to hear firsthand for the first time in my life, and my book is about to be published. I couldn't believe it. Anyways, he told me he was 16 years old at the time. And every single Sunday morning, he went to the airport and watched the planes take off and land. And he was at the airport, he saw the plane hit the ground, take off again, and he got in his car and he followed to where the crash was. And he was the first person at the scene. And he started telling me things that I said, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to hear it. But I said, but by any chance, do you know who the photographer was that took the picture of the doll? And I showed him I had the newspaper clipping. And he said, stay right here. He goes and gets his wife, who works for the Toronto Star, which is our newspaper. And she said, I will find out for you who took this picture. And when we get back to the city, which blew me away. And she did. She found the photographer. I connected with him. I went to his home with the National, who was doing a story on this, and got written permission from him to use this picture in the book. So that to me validated this whole writing of the story at the time so much. I couldn't believe it. There's your answer.
David?
A question from Faye Rosen. Who looked after your brother-in-law when you got married?
Good question. So Mitchell was 4 years older than Barry, and he went through a couple of different stages where we were trying really hard to help him become more independent and learn how to live on his own. We sent him to Israel when we were like 18 or 19. He was on a kibbutz for a few years. Then he came back, and we were very fortunate to have connected him in Montreal. We were all living in Montreal at the time. Through Jewish Family Services, they connected him to Jewish Vocational Services and got him a job where he was closely monitored. And he ended up getting his own apartment. He lived a very primitive life, and he had a lot of challenges, but he was determined to be independent, and he kept his job for at least, I think it's about 20 years. And then, believe it or not, he died a few months before the book came out of swine flu, H1N1. But he lived an independent life in the best way he possibly could. And he was with our children and came to visit often. We had a wonderful relationship with him. Our kids absolutely adored him because he was like a kid.
Yeah. Nice. A question from Keith Myers. You said there was no community support in 1970. How did your school friends react?
That's a really good question. Not only was there no community support, it was the opposite. People were, and people came forward after my book came out and actually admitted this to me, that some people were told to stay away from me. Back then, people treated victims of tragedies as if we were contagious. And people didn't know how to deal with us. They didn't address it. I will never forget my locker. As soon as I wasn't allowed to talk about my family and everything had been cleared out right away, I made a little picture memorial area in my locker in high school. It was my first year in high school. And I will never forget when my gym teacher walked by and told me to take the pictures down. It was inappropriate to have them. So it was the opposite of the way it would be right now. People thought that if you just don't talk about them and you don't deal with this, somehow time will help you heal and you'll get through it. And the school, nobody ever said anything. Nobody talked to me about it. It was just like it was erased. Like nobody knew how to address it, and so they didn't.
Yeah, I think a lot of people believe that if you don't talk about something, you don't see it. It isn't there and it didn't happen.
Exactly.
So your teachers were just as unsupportive as everybody else.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
From Marilyn, she has written, "You are truly inspirational." Can I ask a question, please, which obviously she is doing? As you and your husband have been subjected to so much tragedy in your lives, have either of you ever feared losing anyone close to you since these tragedies?
What I've learned through my life is that when you go through terrible loss, you do spend a lot of time looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next loss that's going to take away whatever it is you have. And that is a very normal reaction. And I did spend many years, and especially when our children were little, feeling so grateful and joyful and happy that we had created this wonderful life, and we have these, we have a great marriage and we have these fabulous children. And when is it going to end? When it's all too good to be true? And when is someone going to destroy that? And I stopped thinking that way and replaced those worrisome thoughts with peaceful thoughts. One day when I was in a very serious car accident, and I realized that, this is just destroying my happiness. It's destroying my present happiness, worrying about what's going to happen in the future. And that, this accident came out of nowhere. Thankfully, I was fine, and miraculously fine, because the paramedics who took me out of the vehicle couldn't believe that I had such minor injuries with the amount of damage that was done to the car. But it was a real eye-opener for me, and it really made me look at the fact that we never know what we're going to have to deal with, and I'm not going to spend my whole life worrying about what's going to come and take away my happiness. I'm going to enjoy it each day. And sometimes I go down that road, there's no question. And I worry, especially now during COVID, with, this uncertainty that we're all living with. But I really try to make a conscious effort to change those thoughts.
There's nothing else, David, at the moment.
Okay, cool. Can I ask you? I step in. You basically couldn't talk about it for about 40 years, and that's when you started with when you started writing the incredible book, and is very similar to the Holocaust survivors, because they also, it wasn't until the early 60s and mid 60s that they also started to design, and now of course it's a very big thing. Before that, nobody really knew. So what is your attitude? I know you're all Jewish and you married Jewish and your kids are all Jewish and so on, but what do you think about religion?
Well, we are very proud to be Jewish, and we don't consider ourselves religious, but we have very strong values about Judaism, if that kind of answers your question.
Also, Yeah.
But I do want to just mention that you're absolutely right, that the fact that I didn't talk about my tragedy, and that when my book did come out, people who had known me for years were shocked. They had no idea that Barry and I had gone through what we had gone through. And I think that's true for, for so many people who went through the Holocaust. And it is now known that it's important to talk about loss and tragedy and anything that people are going through, and not have this attitude that you should never mention it. It's quite the opposite.
As somebody, Victor Huglin, is asking a question just on that subject of how do you get through to depressed people who are just not interested in being helped?
Well, you can only plant seeds, and you can only try your hardest to help people make different choices about how to live. But there are obviously some people who have physiological reasons for their depression, and it doesn't matter how much you speak to them or how many choices you let them know they may or may not have. It has to come from within, and sometimes medication helps. Sometimes just knowing that you have choices gives people opportunities that they may not have known they have. But it's really hard to answer that. That's a very complicated question that I wish there was a simple answer, but I'm sure that there are many psychiatrists out there who are struggling with that very same dilemma.
I'm sure they're looking for their magic wand.
Yeah.
To do so.
There was my wife actually sent me up a question, and she's asking me. She said, didn't you have a close friend that she opened up to over the 40 years? I mean, do you have a close friend?
Oh, yes, I actually have 4 childhood friends who I've been friends with since kindergarten, who I am still incredibly close with. And they obviously knew my story, but we didn't talk about it. And we just didn't talk about it. I would say that the person who has been my anchor, my support, my best friend is my husband. And, we've held each other up all these years, and inspired each other, and gone and done really meaningful things in our lives, which, we're super proud of. And our children are following in our footsteps, which makes us feel really amazing, because, we've obviously shown them through our own lives how important it is to live by our core Jewish values, and to go out there and really make a difference in the lives of other people, and be a really good person full of integrity and honesty. And, that's who they are.
Yeah. Well, while we're on we're a bit of a high now. You've been married for 41 years.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the secret in marriage? I hope my wife's listening to this.
What's the secret?
We've got our own secrets.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, as I told you, when we first met, we shared the same values, and we were both determined to go out there and live a meaningful life. And we've done that together, and we've supported each other, and we've tried to be as flexible and, just trying our best, I would say, to live by the same values. We're very different people, which is kind of a joke in our family, but we have the same core values. And that's what I think is the secret, is sharing those values, and going through life knowing that we both do what's important, and mutually important.
Could I just butt in? Have you ever feared traveling on an aeroplane since that day?
Well, I didn't travel on an airplane from the minute our children were born. We never, ever traveled separately. I would not get on an airplane just with Barry. If we had to go anywhere, we took the kids. So it became an expensive way of coping, but we had to do what we had to do. And again, right around the same time that I had that car accident, I decided that our kids we couldn't always pull them out of school and take them everywhere. I was missing out on business trips and beautiful trips that, I just couldn't go because I was too afraid. And when I decided to give up that fear, I decided to get on a plane, and I take a couple of things to help me, but it was worth it.
Yeah. But I would imagine it was tough getting on a plane the first time.
Oh, definitely. The first time was terrifying.
What was it, a long flight or a short flight that first time?
I flew to Florida, and I actually remember the flight attendants kept coming over because I was literally just sitting in the seat sobbing and they kept coming over, and I said, just leave me alone. Just like, don't talk to me. Just leave me alone. Let me just get through this flight. And I see my aunt is on the call, and I remember my aunt and uncle picked me up at the airport. And I felt so accomplished, like I had really done something that was out of my comfort zone and really important to have done. So yeah, and then it got easier and easier.
All right. Can I are there anybody else? Because otherwise we'll start.
No, there's no one there.
There's no one there, did you say?
Well, they're there, but they're not asking.
I thought the Canadians would be they're big talkers.
No, they're just as shy as the people from Edgware.
Very strange. Okay, your I think your sentence is you say you can't live a positive life with a negative mind, which I think which is fantastic. It is, but how can you change somebody that is either negative, positive? Anybody that's negative, I believe, wants to be positive. I don't think vice versa. But if people are misery, and we all know them, that's what they are, and I suppose that's what they want. I don't know about want to be, but how can you change your persona?
Well, I think understanding that you have choices, and that even if your first thought is negative, you do get to choose a positive one to replace it. Follow me on Facebook. I try to post positive messages every single day. And I really do believe that even people who are habitually negative can make different choices and can become more positive. I don't think anyone is stuck in being negative all the time. I just think they may not know they have choices. And, we get to change our thoughts. We don't have to allow the negative thoughts to have access to our heads every time they try to get in there. We get to choose whether or not we're going to allow those thoughts to live in our heads. And I really do believe that we have that right.
No, because when I think when somebody is talking to you and they don't know you, you're a lovely, bubbly person. I don't think anybody could believe that your history. I mean, it was just, how you did it, I'm not sure, because I can't imagine a lot worse than you went through, but you have, haven't you? As you said, you can't ever forgive what happened, but you carry on with your life in the best way you can, and I think you're fantastic. I mean, really terrific.
Well, it just feels better. And I guess for me, having the first 13 years of growing up in a very positive house with a mother who was super positive and a dad who was jolly, the contrast for me was devastating. I couldn't live that way. And I do believe that sadness and grief can exist at the same time as joy, that you can still live a happy life and never, ever stop missing the people and feeling that grief and sadness. But, it was important enough for me to make the choice that was very different than my dad's. And I guess seeing the way it was just so devastating to watch my father in that state of profound sadness. I couldn't live that way. I couldn't do it.
No. But there's just one thing actually. The cards that the wheels saw that David didn't see, but we won't discuss that. your instructive card.
The slideshow.
Yeah. A lot of people actually really complained about David because he was doing something with them and everybody wanted to watch them. So is it possible to send me a set? Because I think it's fantastic. I could read them every day. Not that I need it, but you know what I mean. And if anybody wants that, then I could forward it on to them as well.
Sure.
Could you do that? Just email them to me. Fantastic. Sure. Well, I must say I'm exhausted in a very strange way. You know, I found it very what's the word? Not difficult. I don't know, but I've met plenty of Holocaust survivors and so on. So you know, which is one thing. But with you, I don't know. You've got something very special. And we've had lots of evenings so far. We do every Wednesday, which you're more than welcome to come every Wednesday. And all the other Canadians can come as well. We'll put you on the list. But I don't think we've had anything really as deep as we've had tonight. So I mean, I wish you all the best. I'd like to keep in touch with you as well. I wish you a happy Purim for tomorrow. We should have some joy then. And do you want to just finish it up, David?
Yes. Would you just let people know what's your Facebook page? I presume it's just your name.
Well, it is my name. Yes. You can find it through Repairing Rainbows or Lynda Fishman. And I wasn't looking for followers for any reason other than I only share inspirational, motivational kind of messages almost daily. And I do that because I think it's really important for people to remember that they have choices about how to live and how to think.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with daily inspirational messages. Absolutely right? Nothing.
I think we all need that.
Yeah, we do. We need some of that. But before you go, I just want to tell people while they're still on here that next week we have an Israeli political analyst. His name is James Marlowe, and the talk will be on, as we have another election coming up in Israel, an election guide for the perplexed. He has a background of 40 years in broadcasting and journalism, and has covered Israeli elections since the 1980s and has extensive knowledge of the parties and candidates. He's broadcast on various networks around the world. He's written for various publications around the world. And I am quite certain it will be a very interesting talk. It makes a change to have an election in Israel. So do tune in. We haven't had one for a good few months. So, and going back, I'll pass you back, David, but just from me to you, Lynda, thank you so much for this evening. It was extremely meaningful and very touching. And I just wish you the best of everything throughout your life. And may you continue with your inspirational messages to everybody for many, many years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. For
have you ever been to the UK?
Yes.
Oh, well, when are you next coming?
Oh, yeah, that's a loaded question.
Ah, okay. Well,
I can't wait to travel again.
We open up on May the 17th.
Yeah. Well, they've got to get vaccine first, haven't they?
Yeah, got to get vaccinated.
Oh, by the way, we must. I know the Hartmans are in there somewhere, but can we wish you Mazel Tov for what do they have?
Great grandson.
So Mazel Tov to the Hartmans. Lovely news, and I think we can all say good night. And thank you, Lynda. I really can't thank you enough. I mean,
my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody for listening in this evening and being with us and supporting Lynda this evening. And thank you all. Well, you should all be well. I wish you a happy Purim. And you should all be well. Hopefully we all have the vaccination before long. We should all be safe and have a wonderful future.
Okay. Right, good night.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Bye, Lynda. We'll speak. Okay, I'll send you the link, actually, a copy of tonight's.
Okay,